Hello and welcome back to the Immaterial Podcast, where we explore the front page and the footnotes to discuss accounting, the law, white-collar crime, and everything in between. I'm your host, Chris Eckemoff, and today we're back with a Record of Consultation episode, sharing the experience, background, and perspective of an esteemed practitioner in the enforcement, accounting, or legal space. My guest today is Robin Andrews, a partner at Pierson Ferdinand. Before private practice, Robin spent nearly 20 years in the SEC's Division of Enforcement, most recently as Senior Trial Counsel in the Bay Area of San Francisco office. He investigated and litigated everything from your bread and butter disclosure cases to high-profile matters involving public company executives, coordinated parallel criminal actions, and spent years thinking about how cases are built and, unfortunately, sometimes how they fall apart. Robin, welcome to the Immaterial Podcast.
Thanks, Chris. It's great to be here. For a long-time listener, first-time caller, as they say, or I guess guest.
You got it.
In this case,
you're one of the painful few who keeps dialing in to hear all we have to say, but we appreciate it. Obviously, it's been an interesting period. I'll say is the understatement of 2026 at the SEC in the past 18 months. You were with the commission up until early 2025. Ended up leaving. Doing what most people do in their free time, taking a bar exam in the state of California, sounds like a real good time. And then stepping into private practice while, a lot of transitions were happening at the commission and in kind of the securities bar generally. Let's really start there. You spent almost 2 decades inside of the enforcement division. What pushed you to make the jump when you did?
I left last April, along with many others, and a lot of things were happening, obviously, at that time. It's hard to think back for a year from right now.
That's right.
There was staffing uncertainty, leadership turnover, not knowing who the next leadership was going to be. I had been in investigative and trial roles in Chicago and San Francisco for a long time. I had been interested in a while to see what it's like to be on the other side of the table and what that transition would look like. It was just about finding the right time to make that plunge. So the timing, everything kind of converged at once. A lot of experienced people that I worked with were leaving at the same time. It was clear that the level of aggressiveness, complexity, creativity in SEC cases was going to drop dramatically. They were advertising that. And I had spent the last few years working on some really challenging matters that required me to kind of marshal everything I learned in 2 decades of investigation and litigation, which was great. It was clear by the next 4 years at the SEC were not going to be anything like that. They were not going to be as fun or as challenging. Seemed like it was time to move on to new things. And as you pointed out, I had moved to California from Chicago. I didn't have to take the bar exam because I was a Fed. I found myself living in California, and if I wanted to have any options, I needed to take the bar exam. So I decided to take a buyout. Spent the summer prepping for the California bar, bet on myself, decided to see what comes next. And in many ways, it's been a pretty smooth transition, at least in the location where I work department. Right. I worked mostly from home at the SEC starting with the pandemic in 2020. I worked from this room when I worked for the San Francisco office. I left right before they made everybody come back to the office 5 days a week. And now I work from home yet again. So at Pierson Ferdinand, we're a totally remote law firm. We have some rental space for depositions, meetings, things like that, but we all work from home. So we're fully remote, tech-driven firm. We use AI and technology to replace the associates. So I'm pretty much doing everything on my cases like I was at the SEC. And it's amazing what you can get done if you can work all day or whatever hours you need to, and not spend time on the BART or whatever train in your area, or driving to the office. And I'll just say this week is totally a coincidence. This Monday was the first day after the expiration of my senior employee cooling off period. If you're at the SEC long enough, if you're senior enough, you have to wait a year after leaving before you can talk to anyone at the SEC about your cases, which is, kind of a weird transition. I've been on the sidelines. I can coach the team, but I can't take the field. I can't talk to the other players. So that was a little frustrating. But this week, finally, I was able to take the field, advocate for my clients. I entered one appearance for a client so far. I got a chat with the SEC yesterday, did ongoing litigation. So it's great to not have that limitation anymore. So after a year, it's good to get back in there.
Yeah, the floodgates are open for you now, Robin. The gloves are off. I like to, again, for all of our viewers and listeners out there, Robin did start by saying it was all about timing. although he did not have to go back into the office. I want to point that out again. It was the timing
Total
thing,
coincidence.
not
Total
the
coincidence.
office thing. Obviously, Robin, you're passionate about kind of what I'll say is both sides of the job. I always come back to the greatest piece of art and media that's ever been created about the things that we do. The famous television series Law and Order, Dun Dun, right? There's the folks who investigate the crimes and the district attorneys who bring the cases. I see a lot of our law enforcement posture, even in the white collar space, relatively similar, right? There's an arm of the commission that is focused on investigating the merits of bringing an action, the regulations related to certain behavior, and then there are the folks who may end up in the courtroom trying those cases. You've sat kind of on both sides of that. You were seeing the exam referral process turn into those investigations, and then that moved to the enforcement action phase. And again, obviously, for some of those getting to trial as well. How has that background really empowered you as whether you're a coach on the sidelines or now 5 or 6 days into back to advocating? How has that approach changed how you advise your clients seeing that full process?
And I'll just start by clarifying that in the regions, I know there's kind of this different culture that you see the home office versus the regional offices. In a lot of the regional offices, we were both parts of the show.
Yes, that's right.
And you took
up the whole 50 minutes, right?
Yeah, well, so you were investigating, and then when you were done with your investigation, if your case litigated, you were expected to stay on the case. Now, you may not be the first chair in the litigation, you have a trial counsel come in and help with that, but you still stayed on the case because you had the institutional knowledge. This is not some simple DUI case where you can hand the file over. You needed someone like me on the trial team or litigation team to have that institutional knowledge. So it was great being able to see it all the way to trial, or in many of my instances, our case got put on hold, criminal folks had their trial, and we helped them out instead. But, same evidence, different cause of action, different sanctions. But I'll say in the regions, there was a lot of that, both the first half of the show and the second half of the show. And to your point on exams, particularly in the Chicago office, which had, and I'm sure still has, a fantastic exam program, particularly the IA space, growing every year. And I worked on a lot of exam referrals where, they would bring things to us either at the end or sometimes early on. We'd be able to kind of do a ride along, not at the exam every moment, but see how they were scoping out the exam, things they were looking at. And when they thought it was likely to result in an enforcement referral, bring us along and say, what should we be asking for? What do you think about this? And so it was helpful to see that and how the scope would change from the opening interview to the end, and then the exam referral often landing on my desk. And so I think, then you go to the next step of the investigation, and then whether you're going to actually bring the case, does it settle, and how is this thing going to look at trial? So I'm drawing on kind of that whole chronology using an exam referral case if we're using a registered client here. And I always start with, always start with the basics. How does enforcement going to look at this case? And would I have wanted to bring an action? But then I would need to take a step back from there. That's kind of where I start. But then I step back and go through the whole life cycle of that case and think, all right, how is exams going to look at this, these facts, what I'm being presented, the documents, the story, how it's being presented by the people who would be interacting with the exam staff. And I think about, how would this have gotten my old friends in Chicago thinking about the case? Would they get really interested? Would they want to dig in and say, oh, there's something here, there's more, what other charges need to be in this? Or is this look like a run-of-the-mill deficiency that is being remedied, someone's on top of it, there's credible counsel involved, they're going to get a deficiency letter, but that might be it. Figuring out, predicting how is that going to look if this issue gets, if you get examined a few months from now, let's assume. And then you think a step forward. Okay, let's say they get that exam referral. What is that going to look like to enforcement? If investigator Robin gets that on his desk, is this the kind of thing I would get excited about, really want to sink my teeth into, really want to cover all the bases and work it up the best I can for a recommendation? Or just look like something where it needs to have the tires kicked, it needs to have the angles considered. There might be an enforcement action here, but it's not going to be, again, that the remedy, the self-remedy may have already been happened. There's not going to be a really big enforcement. It's not going to be fraud, for example. Or, is it going to be something where you investigate all those things and you're heading towards what you think is going to be a termination letter, where you're closing the case, but you just need to cover all the bases and make sure you're not missing anything. And I had plenty of cases like that. And then, moving on to the next chapter, if this is going to be heading towards an action memo, is this something that trial counsel Robin would read and say, wow, this is something, I would like to try this case? Or is this something where I'm going to look at the evidence, read the transcripts, and say, this is a little thin. We should be settling to something lesser. I don't see this as a fraud case, or, there's risk to the fraud case. And so I think it's been really fun on the other side, putting on that enforcement hat, looking at kind of the inputs of the enforcement and the output being the action memo, and then what happens after that, and thinking about what do I see in front of me that's going to make the staff at each phase there want to dig in and expect more sanctions, and which ones are going to not, and have them think, there's nothing more to see here. We've identified the problems as being remedied, and thinking about how to build the trust with the staff at each phase, whether it's advising the client who's dealing with the examination or myself personally. And again, just starting to get to do that, building the trust and the inferences that maybe there's good faith mistakes here, as opposed to on the other side, that distrust and investigator spidey sense that there's more here, we need to dig, this might not be, this doesn't quite add up. And I'd say just drilling down a little more on this, one thing that any IA or BD client particularly needs to think about is, if someone comes in here and digs deep, is there going to be a disconnect between what your procedures say you're doing and what you're actually doing? Is that all going to add up? Right. Because you'd be surprised how many clients are surprised later, we thought we were doing this, but we're not. And so that's the kind of unwelcome surprise that could get either exams or an enforcement excited and say there's more here.
That's what we always tell our clients too. I know, Robin, you're the same posture. They say, how can I prepare myself in the case something happens? Create a plan ahead of time. Whatever it is, right? Every framework, every procedure is not going to be perfect, but you'll have something that you thought of when waters were calm, for when that storm comes in. If you can respond to that plan, you'll most likely be in a better position. They say, great, awesome, thank you. They make their piece of paper and they go away. We come back and ask them how it's going, and they go, oh yeah, we just have that on the shelf. We don't do that. And we say, guys, we talked about something that'll make you in a better position, but not following the plan that you put together is definitely going to put you, in a hole a little bit more than, even if a plan doesn't exist. So definitely good lessons there. But Robin, I'm interested, maybe, kind of candidly, you've described everything obviously as what would get Robin, the exams referral receiver, excited. What would get Robin, the enforcement attorney, excited? What would get Robin, the trial attorney, excited? How different is the Robin take from, we'll say, the average take in the Chicago or San Francisco office, or broadly across the SEC? And is there a little bit of wiggle room there to think about generally where the commission may be today or in the next 18 months, or where they were when this action happened? All those kind of, how much does that personal preference really weigh into it in today's commission?
I worked on a lot of, I was never in a specialty group. I was always in the kind of general frauds unit, as I used to joke about. I think I worked on a lot of what everyone is calling the bread and butter cases, the lying, the cheating, and the stealing. So a lot of those fraud. But then we had a lot of exam referrals, had a little of both. You had some of the compliance issues. You had the failure to supervise, issues like that. I'd say that, right now it's going to be those kind of core cases. It's going to be the lying, cheating, and stealing. But if it's a registered entity, they're still bringing those cases. There was a negligent fraud case even last year, I think with an IA. Those are still going to be out there. And I'd say, I also don't want to forget about FINRA. Kind of FINRA and exams are I think, I'd say the things that are at the front of mind for both counsel, consultants, and the clients, that FINRA doesn't seem to be slowing down that much. Exams or enforcement. SEC exams are still doing its thing. Obviously, they have different priorities, but they're still doing lots of exams. They're very active, particularly the BDIA space. We'll talk about a little bit of enforcement where they are and why they're where they are today. They're a little more selective. I think it's resources and also some of the organizational things that we'll talk about. They've talked about this, kind of the meat and potatoes, the bread and butter issues. But
you're making me hungry, Robin.
Lying, cheating, and stealing, the holy trinity of fraud, as I used to call it. But to steal a line from my old boss, Gerbier, at SIFMA 2 weeks ago, there's no meat on the plate yet. They're getting there. And, there's some, they just had the results come out, and they have their selling of what they have done so far. But there is a little bit of a funnel problem right now where, again, you have to think about the life cycle that I walk through with exams. I would often get exam referrals where an exam was very old. And I would often get exam where it's not that it was just handed to me. It was a MUI. It was somewhere else. It was sitting there. The exam might have been a year ago. And I think what we're going to see is a lot of evidence being gathered, as exams likes to say, going out and seeing how the industry is doing what it's doing, what practices are out there. A lot of that is being gathered. There's a lot of conclusions being brought, but not everything is going to be automatically handed over to enforcement and actively worked. So there's a big delay there, and enforcement is still in the holding pattern in its capacity. And I think we're seeing a lot of that.
Yeah, so we've got, folks out there viewing and listening that serve in what we'll call a compliance role, and it's one of those terms of art that we can define that in any way that we choose. But if you're going to give those kind of people a practical takeaway based on this bread and butter type environment, this holding pattern environment, what kind of takeaway would you give them?
I would say you shouldn't change. You really shouldn't change anything from 2 years ago on how you're handling this. Obviously, you're not worried about so much getting hit for text messages and things like that. But putting aside those particular initiatives, like the bread and butter compliance issues, what are our policies? Are we following it? To your point, is it just a piece of paper?
Yeah.
I like to explain that the burden of proof is a little backwards. You're going to be asked to show how you did this. You're going to be asked to show your work. Exactly. Like, okay, send me a copy of all those procedures. Okay, now show me how you did those things. And that might mean, obviously, at the very least, making sure you actually did them and having procedures to check on that. But beyond that, keeping good records of what you did and when you did it. And it's just, I'd say papering the file in the good faith sense, not the bad faith, not the fake documents, but you did a thing, you did it right, you have some notation. It could be something that's part of a process, could be automated. Maybe now AI is generating that thing for you. But it's in the file so you can show what you did and when you did it without having to drag witnesses in to remember all those details. And so I kind of have that assuming that burden of proof, not that you have to do that. Certainly, it's not. You don't have to, but if you do, it's going to save you a lot of time and headache. You're not going to have to bring a bunch of people to talk to the examiners or enforcement, and it makes it more likely that exams, for example, is going to look at all those records and say, okay, they are doing what they said they were going to do. Those records are being done, and frankly, if you do that, you're going to catch the aberration. You're going to catch the mistakes. You're going to catch the people within the organization, whether it's some rep somewhere or someone who just isn't following it.
Yep.
So I think that helps.
Yeah, and like you hinted at earlier, Robin, we want to dive a little bit into talking about the SEC's forward-looking posture today, and I put that in air quotes. When we spoke a week ago about sitting down and chatting, we were in a very different environment. We're recording this on the afternoon of April 8th. Just yesterday, on April 7th, the SEC had finally, to what some might define as a late 3 or 4 months late posture, announced its enforcement results for fiscal year 25. That's entering September 30 of 2025, with a very interesting piece, we'll call it. Gone are the days of the beautifully bound hard copy books of the enforcement report, and here we are on enforcement results still here in the end of fiscal 25. And also, not mere hours ago, the Division of Enforcement appointed its new director, David Woodcock, out of Dallas, with a history with both the SEC and in private practice. So our kind of, hey, let's kind of chat, wax poetically about what might happen at the SEC is kind of moot at this point, Robin, as we've got answers to some of those questions we were positing. So kind of open season. How do you feel about the past 18 hours or so in the SEC's releases? How do you think that informs some of the things we've already talked about and the way we'll deal with our clients going forward?
See, I wish you hadn't used the date because I was going to pretend that this was the 7th. And
you were
going to ask me, who do you think they're going to pick for enforcement director? I'd say David Woodcock. Then
we'll edit that out. We'll edit that out. You sound very smart.
That would have made me look a lot smarter than I actually was. So I think, we want to maybe take a quick step back and see where we are how we got to here and how that affects what enforcement's doing. And then we'll get to where we go from here. So everyone might, if you haven't already, look at the GAO report that just came out, kind of looking at how many people were lost in fiscal 2025. There's some bits in there about some buyouts that might surprise some people. If we kind of look back, and I was here for part of it, there was a hiring freeze starting September 2024 because of the budget. So you kind of put a hold on a lot of people who were leaving, couldn't be replaced. Then a whole lot of folks left in March and April 2025, some with the fork of the road, some with the more formalized procedures. A lot of institutional knowledge headed out the door all at once. There was a mandatory return to office in April 2025. No real credit for telework. And I'll just say, it seems like that's not a big deal. But for the very highly productive enforcement staff, and I like to think I was one of them, that greatly reduces your productivity because you can't have meetings or interview witnesses when you're on the train. And it was a real issue. Like right now, I can get up at 5:30. I can be working from 5:30 to whatever. I don't have to worry about time zones. I can just get things done. It really slowed a lot of people down. And I think there wasn't a lot of incentive to work extra hours. You weren't going to really necessarily get telework. That was going to slow down a lot of productivity. And when I left, there was a clear holding pattern of figuring out what is in the pipeline. And remember, these investigations can take a very long time, and some of them were opened, and through no fault of the staff, they've been open for a long time because it was handed to them when it was 3 months old or 6 months old, and they had something else with higher priority. So sometimes these cases, investigations take a very long time to get from beginning to end, and management was really figuring out what are we going to continue working on. What is on the docket here that we are not doing anymore, that kind of thing. Because now we have acting Commissioner Ueda. There's a lot of obvious, predicted, previewed policy shifts. There was a lot of asking, okay, who do we ask about? Yeah, it was all coming back to Sam. I'm sure Sam Walden being asked, are we still doing this? And I'm sure he was asking acting Chair Ueda's office, are we still doing this? What should we... There's a lot of figuring out what are we going to keep doing here. Should we close these? Should we open new ones? So there was a lot of, and you have to do that. You don't want to waste time on those matters. And so I think they spent a lot of time clearing the decks. Then you have the capacity with who hasn't left. And I'm sure there were a lot of TCRs sitting on the shelf, as there always are, that they did not have time to take off the shelf because during the last year or 6 months of the Gensel administration, there was no time for that. So then they had to go back to the shelf and go through all those TCRs and figure, okay, is this the kind of thing that we're going to be doing now? And that could take a long time to get up to speed. You're sending out preservation letters. You're sending out the initial requests. That is a long lead time. And then they took a record, at least in modern history, record time to find a enforcement director. Right. Yeah. We'll talk about this, like 8 months, something like that. Yeah. I don't know if that's to announcement or actually Judge Ryan starting. I think it was September. Then somewhere around there, this is the GO report, they offered another round of buyouts for managers only. And there were 40-something people left after that program. Now that obviously, I think there were probably some management groups that didn't have a lot of people or they needed to reshuffle.
There was writing on the wall that had been written, right, in the past few months, if you will.
So that makes sense. But now you have to kind of reorganize who's working, what managers have to get up to speed on what cases. There's a lot to do there. And then what was happening? Oh, that's the end of September. What happens in October? Oh, yeah, record longest shutdown ever in the history of the federal government. October 1st to mid-November. All right, so that didn't help. Then you start up. Now you've got the holidays. And I'll just say, Thanksgiving to Christmas, hard to get a lot done, not later, because they're government employees, but because witnesses are on vacation, counsel's on vacation, all kinds of things are happening, people trying to push things out. So that slowed things down. So I'd say the lowest point of activity is going to be December. Not necessarily filing, but just getting things moving. And now we've got January. So now we're down to January this year, 3 months ago. February. And then Judge Ryan resigns effective immediately in March. And I think the word got out, and they started hiring USA Jobs. They're starting to hire some people. This new SOX group.
That's right.
New specialty group. First one in a long time, other than if you don't count the renaming of the crypto and
the fraud,
whatever that group keep moving around. Which is interesting because the last I was at the commission when Paul Atkins was Commissioner Atkins, and I recall in those era, the Kazami era, he wasn't particularly excited about specialty groups. But I guess he's okay with them now. Because they're going to be kind of insourcing some of the PCOB work, which is what I think we think is happening. And word on the street is that enforcement is going to be hiring a bunch more core enforcement folks in each office. I've heard like 3 to 5 per office. That's what I heard before last week, and now the SEC budget just landed.
Yeah.
And they're requesting, I think with the FTE equivalent, like 55 people, it's like a 5% increase. So they lost like 15 or so, 15 or 18%. They're going to hire 5% more.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Not the same people. And
Right. Yeah.
if it's
fill those
hire
spots
some more
that
people.
had been.
And that takes a long time through the HR process. You got to bring them in. You got to onboard them, even if they're very experienced attorneys. The SEC has its own weird way of doing things.
Mm-hmm.
Given the timing, I'd say they're probably aiming to get them all in by the end of the fiscal. And so what does this all mean? So kind of going back to your original question, what does this mean? This means that the capacity to actually bring those cases, whether it's get it to the finish line settled or filed, litigated, all the things that are being investigated, whether it's an exam or investigation right now, the actual bodies to do more of that, obviously they have plenty of people right now who can do it, they're not going to be able to have that full capacity until, I'd say, beginning 2027, because there's going to be a little bit of time lead there to get those things. So I'd say end of 26, early 2027, whatever tires are being kicked right now, whatever evidence is being gathered, whatever conclusions are happening right now, then we'll see it. And assuming it's not very old conduct that requires you to hurry up and not miss a statute of limitations issue. And I think a lot of it's the trial unit. A lot of trial unit loss in a lot of offices, and there's a lot of shuffling around. And you need those people in place to bring the cases if the defense bar says, no, we're going to fight this. And they're probably a little more emboldened nowadays, because if you're only bringing certain kind of cases, they assume the commission is not going to be as aggressive as before, so they might be a little more bold and say, no, we're going to fight that. And now you have to have the trial unit and staff in place for that. So I think that all brings us to, I guess, today.
Right, whatever day it is, and our
Crystal Ball
podcast. Yeah,
right. I'm predicting as David Woodcock.
I think that's a great prediction. We'll see how it turns out.
Yeah. But in all seriousness, so I think obviously Judge Ryan leaving all of a sudden was a big deal. And it definitely leaves things in alerts. It's definitely bad for morale and consistency.
I guess if I can interrupt you, has there been another Division of Enforcement director who has left in kind of a similar manner or time frame? I mean, I can't think of one. No one has ever left other than, typically it's right after or right before an administration change. Right, kind of that January resignation is communicated beforehand, all that kind of thing.
I think it might have been December or November or something. But anyway, it's leading up to an election or right after an election. And there might have been a couple in the summer, but they had like a deputy in place. And I know we had Stephanie and Steve.
Yeah, kind of.
Like they were co-directors, so when one leaves, you're okay.
Yeah.
This has never happened before. They immediately went out with a press release saying, we're going to have someone in coming weeks. And people didn't know, okay, is that hopeful? Do they really have someone? And lo and behold, they were right. They obviously had someone in mind. I would say, Judge Ryan leaving was not good in the short term. I don't think it's going to matter now because they found someone so quickly. It's going to be a blip. Obviously, there's the reporting out there of why she left, and maybe she didn't like how some things were being handled with some of the lying, cheating, and stealing cases. Maybe we'll hear more about that. Maybe we won't. Even in the interim, even if it would have been a longer gap, Sam Walden is a great. I worked with him a lot, particularly when he came back about 4 years ago. I worked with him a lot. He's great. He has that institutional knowledge. You keep the trains running. He wasn't going to do anything new. He was going to wait but there was probably no interruption of service, so to speak, with Sam running things there. And so that brings us to David Woodcock. So this is no surprise to anyone who's been following this or who knows him. I think I knew him when I was back in the Chicago office before, late teens. I think I know he was enforcement. He was Fort Worth's regional director back then. He's the perfect person for the position and for the time, particularly given the change. And word on the street last year was that he was the shoe-in to get the job. That everyone expected he was going to be the enforcement director last year, and it kept dragging out. And some people said, oh, maybe he turned it down. It's not the right time. He's having too much fun at Gibson Dunn, But clearly they moved quickly. They went back to him, and I'm sure they said, David, we need you back. We need you to right the ship. We need you to have the steady hand, someone the staff knows. You'll help, revamp the morale that is down for the last year or more, and you know how to run things here. You know how to do this, and so I'm sure they went back to him, and it sounds like it sounds like he's not going to start for another month, but everyone knows he's coming, and everything's fine. And again, Sam will keep things running fine until then. He knows the ins and outs of all of this. He's former regional director. He'll get right to work with Sam as soon as he hits the ground. He'll hit the ground running in May. I mean, he'll be able to make those tough enforcement decisions. He'll be able to navigate the politics of the chair's office. And when the commissioners are focusing on things other than enforcement, as they have been and will continue to do, and he has the savvy to react quickly to political and policy winds. Who knows? There could be a crypto crash, and then a lot of things change. But I think
we won't predict too much future here today.
Yeah, no. Well, I think a lot of people inside the SEC are happy about this. So I'll just say that. So that's a good sign. And I think that's definitely promising for continuity and carrying out what Chair Atkins says he wants to carry out, which is more aggressive lying, cheating, and stealing cases, but quality over quantity, as you said.
My favorite part of the press release about David being appointed as director of the Division of Enforcement was that I did not know that he created and served as chair of the SEC's cross-office and cross-division financial reporting and audit task force, which was designed to enhance the SEC's detection and prosecution of violations, Robin, that we love involving accounting and false financial statements. David, if you're out there and you want to come on and chat about that policy and some of those ideas, this is the nerd group that we want to have on here. So great little tidbit about his.
And that'll work. That'll work in perfectly with the new stocks group and everything they're doing, and I'm sure I'm sure they've asked him about that and whether they need to get more people in there as they figure out the hiring. But again, perfect person for the position and the time, and given all of those factors.
I won't put words in your mouth, Robin, but you've talked about him being a steady hand. I guess I'm interpreting that to say when there's an environment of change, go find an accounting nerd out there because they're really going to help with whatever you want to do going forward. Again, that's not your words; those are mine. Maybe we should get that put on a t-shirt as well. So, Robin, we've spent a ton of time talking about your recent experience, the landscape that we're in, kind of how you advise clients. There is not a piece of media, content, podcast production today that does not have to mention everyone's least favorite two letters, AI, artificial intelligence. I think that we're now at a point here in the spring of 26 where we've moved from gloom and doom, sky is falling / super robots taking our jobs to actionable activity, maybe somewhat even defined regulatory consideration of artificial intelligence in specific circumstances. I know that compliance teams out there are utilizing, considering, discussing, probably still fearing a little bit AI. What is your take on what the SEC is thinking about artificial intelligence right now?
They're going to take the same basic tack they did with robo-advisors. And I think they're going to say, you know what? New technology, same rules. Mm-hmm. Right? It's all going to come back to that. And same responsibilities under those rules. It all comes back to showing, are you fulfilling your Reg BI obligations, your fiduciary obligations, whatever you're applying to that? How is human oversight playing a role in that process? Showing how you're using it responsibly. I think it all comes back to those first principles. Now, the staff is going to have to be able to understand your explanation of how you're using it and what the tool is. There's going to be that communication issue. But I think it all goes back to those first principles.
So if I'm at a firm and I'm using AI for some of my compliance work, maybe in an advisory capacity to interact directly with kind of the business side, or maybe in a surveillance or, kind of a transaction monitoring position, how should they be thinking about AI versus, we'll say, maybe 3-4 years ago, how it was run back then?
I mean, I think you start with, and I have clients where we're dealing with the same questions. You start with some of the robo-advisor guidance out of IM from a couple years. I mean, there's a couple of them, I think it's 2017, 2022. I assume at some point IM will come up with something that it probably says roughly the same thing, like here's how to apply the marketing rule to this, here's how to apply the Reg BI and fiduciary responsibilities to it. But I think it's what I said earlier about the burden being shifted. They're going to ask, like, show me, prove to me what you did, how you did it, and how it all fulfills those obligations. New technology, same rules. How did you follow those rules? And it's going to be the client and we are going to need to be able to explain to the staff, whether it's exams or enforcement, This is the tool. Here's how we created that tool. Here's what it does. Here's what it doesn't do. Here are the controls on it to make sure it doesn't do those things. Here's how we have comfort in that. And then how do we show, again, that burden of proof, so to speak, how do you show that your controls are working, you're doing testing, which is evidence that they're working, and your record keeping, again, going back to the record keeping, that it's all there to show we've been testing it, we know that the controls work, we have the records to show it. Now, there could be a kind of overwhelming problem with record keeping in the AI space and some of these agents. So a lot of people are the technical folks that have to think about that and work with us on that. And then you're going to have to show that all those things were sufficient. They did the job. This was not, a AI agent doing its thing. And you can explain, here's the points where the human got involved. And obviously it's not a human loop. It's not in the day-to-day. That's the whole point, is not to have it. But what is your review period? What are they doing? How are they reviewing? How are they sure that what they're reviewing is accurate? What ways are they testing this? And you have a human being who can say these things they don't just say, here's a bunch of records, that proves we're fine. You have a human being who can explain that. Maybe that's just CCO, maybe it's just CTO, whoever it is. Someone who can explain it and say, here's what I did every quarter or week or whatever you're doing. And if there's issues with the output, to show how you corrected things. Show how you added controls, how you overrode whatever output, whatever things are going on, and how there's a steady human hand on the till. And again, exams is not just going to ask, what is the tool? You want to convince them, prove to them, you knew you could trust it, and here's why. And if you can do that, and they believe you, and it's credible, and they can kick the tires themselves, then I think you're going to solve lead heading.
I think so too. It's an interesting period as we're in this change of enforcement leadership, of the use of AI. A lot of the questions I'm seeing from clients, Robin, that you and I might share or have worked with kind of in the market is a discussion about self-reporting and cooperation, right? We've identified something. The algorithm did this, or we've looked back and seen that our structure to perform these services has run afoul, maybe a foot fault of the lines of what we think is following the regulations to the letter. I mean, I think a couple of years ago, we would have taken a posture around self-reporting that's maybe a little different calculus now. I don't know. Give me your take. Where do you see kind of the raising your hand and saying mea culpa today in April of 26 versus maybe a couple of years ago and maybe a year or two from now?
Well, the signs, what we're hearing from the administration, from the new SEC is, come explain it to us and show us how this is a good faith mistake, and you're not going to be punished for that. That's what they're telling us. And maybe there's a few examples out there where we can show that has happened. I obviously have seen the horror stories where someone came in and self-reported and then got hit with a giant penalty anyway, or whatever. There was more digging. It was not worth their time doing that. I think it's a little safer now to do that, and I particularly if it's a technology thing. The administration, they've said, we're going to be technology neutral. We're not going to say this is a new scary thing, so we're going to look at it with a jaundiced eye. Then they're specifically said they're not going to do that. So if you do everything I already advised, on all of the record keeping and the testing, and it shows like this is a good faith mistake and you fixed it, then it seems like right now is the time to do that, because you're going to, they may still ask a lot of tough questions. You need to be ready for that. You need to be able to document it. And someone like you or someone like me can get in there, ask a lot of questions, get everything, and put it together in a nice package and explain it to the commission. Have some representatives to the client to be there to talk about it from personal perspective. That I think is the right way to go here right now. If it really is we made a mistake, and kind of crossing over to the AI point. There are going to be, the AI is going to make mistakes. The AI is going to get it wrong and rebalance something in a crazy way or do something that you didn't expect, just like a real advisor does. And you need to be able to document when that happens, that you were on it, you caught it, you fixed it, here's how I did it. And so sometimes that's going to be something you need to come to the commission, and sometimes it's not. You're just going to be, hey, the AI did something we didn't expect. Here's how we documented how we fixed it. We had expertise come in, someone like Chris, or we had counsel, and here's what we did, and we documented in new policies, and here's how we're going to make sure it doesn't happen again. There's going to be a judgment call at what level, particularly if if there's any investor harm, any client harm, someone who later could complain about it, and then you don't want to be the one explaining, oh, well, it happened, but we didn't bring it to you. So that's where I think you would say, look, here's what happened. It did affect clients, whatever the issue is. But here's how we made it right, how we fixed whatever the problem is, refunded fees, whatever the issue is that you do for mediation. And right now is the time to go in and do that so that you get a non-prosecution or, a termination, whatever the official resolution is so that it goes away. As we get closer to the end of this administration, though, then you have to start thinking about that long tail for statute of limitations, and this goes for the I made a mistake and in good faith fix it kind of thing. You have to really start thinking, what are we doing now that this administration is not going to hit us on? But if someone complains 2 years from now and an enforcement case is opened 3 years from now, that could be a very different story.
You got to do that calculus, like you said, like that math about where you want to be and what the probability is.
Right now, if you have it figured out, you think you have your head around the problem and you fix it, I would go in right away, be proactive, show you're good citizens, you're a good member of the regulated entity population, and you're trying to do the right thing, and you're transparent with your regulator and all that good stuff.
Of course, and every case that we're hypothetically talking about is facts and circumstances based, and we are not recommending any single course of action for any clients.
But we're hearing all the right things. I mean, I'm sure someone will say something if they're told come in and then they get hit over the head for like what we've heard from before. But so far so good.
Thank you so much for taking the time today to talk about, obviously, these ever-changing and evolving SEC and regulatory issues, literally hours before we got on the phone today. I appreciate you sharing your insights with us. It's been a really great conversation.
Thanks for having me. I really appreciate it.
As always, we promise that although the Immaterial Podcast isn't authoritative, it will always be authentic. We'll see you next time. Thanks for tuning in. The Immaterial Podcast is brought to you by Immaterial Productions LLC. Any opinions or discussions on the Immaterial Podcast are provided by the hosts and guests on their own behalf and not on behalf of any employer, government agency, regulator, or third party. The information provided herein is for educational entertainment purposes only and is not formal legal or financial advice. You can find more from the Immaterial Podcast on social media platforms like YouTube, LinkedIn, X, and TikTok at Immaterial Pod.